Okay, welcome everyone to the Heroku Eventing Pilot Developer Demonstration. My name is Andy Fawcett and welcome to the pilot. And this video is intended to give you an overview of why we built the technology, what you can achieve with it, and some demonstrations and where to go next. So let's get started. So keep in mind that all of the information I'll be sharing and pilot sign-up pages and things like that will be available in the description of this video below. So why Heroku Eventing? What problems is it solving and how? Well, managing disparate data is largely a solved problem with Data Cloud, but handling multiple event services remains challenging, particularly in large enterprise environments where there's potentially a diverse set of eventing services, event buses, and not to mention multiple orgs in scenarios, and these are increasingly common for our customers. So for developers, this means that event-driven architecture is hard because they have to manage multiple authentications, multiple publication and subscription services across each of these and within each of their applications. So it just makes their lives a little harder with managing all of this and distracts them from building amazing apps. And we don't want that at Heroku. We want you to focus on building amazing application experiences and less of the plumbing. So Heroku Eventing is here to solve for these problems, and it does so by managing all of the subscriptions and publications in one place. It's in the Heroku environment, and it securely stores the authentication details to access those eventing services as well. And importantly for the developer, provides a single API to subscribe and publish to all the events and webhooks that the application needs to get the job done. And of course, because this is Heroku, we comply with a number of industry standards, specifically cloud events and Bloblang are used in this technology. So what are the key components of Heroku Eventing? Well, there's four that we need to understand, and we'll go through revisiting these as we go through the various demonstrations. So the first one is a connection. And a connection can happen both for a subscription, as in something that you want to listen to from within your application, or a publication, as in something you want to communicate out from your application. And currently we support connections for subscribing to events and publicizing to events for Salesforce orgs. And in the Data Cloud case, you can publish to webhooks. And the next concept to consider is streams. It's a really powerful way of connecting subscriptions and publications together. You don't necessarily have to do that in code either. So a subscription can basically, for the pilot, listen to a number of platform events from a connected Salesforce org. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can use the events to come into the subscribe API and respond using your code. Or, as we'll see shortly, you can create a webhook inside Heroku with some code that'll get called each time that event is received. From a publication point of view, what you're doing here is connecting events that you want to send to, as well as webhooks that you want to receive and process events, and also any code that you might write that you want to handle those events. Finally, streams. Streams allow you to configure Heroku to tell it to take an event, multiple events and subscriptions, and potentially send those over to another event, a webhook, or your own code. So it's a very powerful way to configure how you want to orchestrate an event-driven architecture. Ultimately, the publication API also has its own way of invoking it. You don't necessarily have to use these methods, but you can if you want the flexibility of sending events dynamically from your code to your publications. So what can you do? What are we going to see in this demonstration video? Well, the first demo I'm going to show you gets things off with a very basic example of how you can subscribe and start listening to events that you've subscribed to. So we're going to see how you can receive cloud events from events resulting from Salesforce CDC events, otherwise known as change data capture events. So in other words, whenever anything changes in Salesforce org, you get an event. The second demo we're going to look at takes a different slant on that first demo and says, well, actually I want to just invoke some code whenever that event arrives, and maybe you want to time multiple events to that particular webhook that you develop. So we'll see a very basic webhook developed in Heroku that's receiving those cloud events and processing them. And then we'll bring it all together with a more complicated demo, which implements an event-driven worker job. So it's quite common to want to do a lot of heavy lifting and complex processing with Heroku. And it's a very good way to allow some of that offloading and compute to go into Heroku from Salesforce by using an event-driven architecture. So we're going to implement an event-driven worker job that receives an event from a Salesforce environment, processes, in this case, calculates some pricing information, and does that through a webhook. And when it's finished, it's going to send an event back to the Salesforce environment so that the further processing can continue. In this case, we're going to send a notification to the user's web browser or mobile application. So 3 demos that will show us the basics of how to listen to events, how to implement webhooks, and how to send events using Heroku Eventing. So let's get started with the first demo. Of course, we're in our Salesforce environment here, and we'll be using accounts as well as actually opportunities. So just familiarize yourself with the accounts that we'll be using here in the demo today. So the first thing we're going to do, as I mentioned earlier, is create change data capture events. And that's very easy to do under the Salesforce setup menu. Just choose which object or entity you want to have change data capture enabled for and move it over to the right-hand side list. So I've already done that. I've set it up for accounts and opportunities. So now that we know when we use the Heroku Eventing technology, those events are available to be subscribed to. Okay, so let's take a look at our first demo. And this is a basic demonstration of how we can listen to events that are being sent to the subscriptions that we've configured with Heroku Eventing. So this is a very simple Java application. It's simply using a polling technique to obtain the events and dump them out to the console. So we need to run some CLI commands to configure the add-on. It's delivered as an add-on as the Heroku Eventing pilot. So let's go ahead and use our add-on command to add that particular add-on. And if we use the Heroku config command, we can see that we've got a number of environment variables that are giving us some URLs that our application code can call to either publish or subscribe to events. So we're definitely going to be using the subscribe URL environment variable here today. And you can see the logic's receiving that URL so it can start polling on it. The next thing we want to do is authenticate with one or more orgs that we're going to use. And that's right, you can use multiple orgs here and start subscribing your application to one or more orgs. As I said, it's very common to have multiple orgs in a Salesforce environment for customers. And this is a very useful way to manage all of those events in a singular way. So that authentication has completed. So the next thing we want to do is then configure a subscription. And we're just going to run this command, which is the subscription Salesforce create command. We gave it an arbitrary name, which is unique to Heroku. But you can see here's the change data capture event name, which is familiar for those of you that have been doing CDC in Salesforce. That'll be the name that you typically use. So now that we've configured the subscription, and we should be able to start seeing events coming through. So we can see here that it's polling for events, waiting for those to be received. So let's go ahead and make an edit to a particular account. And we're just going to change the last digit of the phone number there and hit save. And Salesforce now, because we configured CDC, generates that event. And yep, sure enough, we saw the event come through. We saw that we received a cloud event, that's its ID, and per our logic in this code, we just asked it to dump out the event data, which in this case was a change data capture event. It's pretty verbose in this case because this particular account has a lot of fields configured on it, but it gives you a lot of information about what just happened to that record. So excellent, and this is a genuine way in which you could handle events and subscribe to them. And it's a very good way of building a particular handler for multiple events that are coming in. But you are left doing some of the kind of polling and handling at a fairly low level. If you prefer, and what's generally recommended, is to use a webhook. So this particular demo is doing a very similar thing, but it's configured a webhook within Heroku, and it's a much simpler piece of code, as you can see, and dumps out the data as it arrives to the webhook. So let's go ahead and configure this particular demo. And for this, we need to create a publication. We've already done the subscription for this application. It's already subscribing to the account change data capture event. And notice that when we created this publication, we gave it the URL to our Heroku app, which is where the webhook resides, and it's going to get called. And we also gave it the source subscription. So when we do that with the -s parameter, when we actually go and look at the CLI commands, the streams rather, we can see that we now have a account change event in Salesforce that is now connected to the publication that we just created called account webhook, which is effectively our application. So that's really all we should need to do at this point to actually see these events coming through directly to our webhook. So let's go to our output window again. You can see our Spring application is running. I'm just going to clear that so it's a bit easier to see the event data. We're going to go once again and edit that account. And we're going to change the number back again. So now when we go back here momentarily, once it's finished saving that, yep, sure enough, we get once again the cloud event. So yeah, in comparison, this is just another way in which you can receive subscriptions, but it's using webhooks compared to the previous example, which is just polling for the subscription. So slightly more low level, but more flexible way of doing things. But ultimately, if you simply want to do processing against one or more given events, webhooks is definitely a cleaner approach to take. So let's move forward now into the third and final demonstration. And to do that, we're going to take a look at our price calculation demo. And this particular demo is designed to process opportunities when their records change. For example, when it goes to prospecting to quoting. And in this case, we want to do some heavy lifting because calculating prices on orders in most organizations is a pretty complicated task based on regional requirements and discounting rules. So we're using Heroku to do that heavy lifting. So this particular webhook is being called to do that. And the webhook is going to receive the opportunity ID, the user, and it's going to calculate by running a SOQL query. Here is the SOQL query being run in Java, and it's just going to do a basic calculation. In this case, imagine it's somewhat more complicated than what you see. And then we're finally going to use another event to notify the user that that calculation has been completed. So once again, let's run some CLI commands to configure the rest of this. So we're going to run a subscription command here to subscribe to the opportunity change event so that we know when the opportunity records are changing. And we're going to create a publication. As we did in the previous demo, this publication is to our own application here, our Heroku application running our webhook. And we're also then going to create another publication, and this time this is a publication to not a webhook but a platform event. So this allows this application to send an event back to Salesforce when it's finished doing the processing, which is exactly what this logic's doing here. So the final thing we want to do, as you probably noticed, is we're doing some querying here. And what enables that to happen is we've also used another pilot. And do check out the video link in the description called the Heroku Integration Pilot. And we're going to enable Heroku Integration Pilot by adding this particular add-on. And then we're also going to do the authentication that that particular add-on needs in order to communicate with the Salesforce environment. So we're going to quickly do that login here. And once that login completes, we'll be able to see that authenticating back in the CLI. Okay, so we're going to ask the dyno to restart just so it can pick up all of those changes. And let's review what's just happened here with the subscriptions. So we have one subscription that is going to be used to listen to events on the change data capture for opportunities. We also have two publications. The first publication is the webhook that we want to get called when the event is received, and the other publication is to an event, not a webhook but an event, and this allows this application logic to send that event back to Salesforce, and where we're actually going to use a flow to do some more processing. So what that looks like within a stream is you can see that it's automatically created because we used that -s parameter earlier, a stream. So we now have the opportunity change event in Salesforce creating a webhook, sending to a webhook called price calculation webhook, which is effectively this code. Now keep in mind the event that this is sending is done in code, so we don't configure that in Heroku. It's all done in the code that you see on screen. So let's take a look and remind ourselves that we've got change data capture set up for the opportunity. It's all we needed to do in that particular case. And we've got a platform event which takes the information that's been calculated, the price in this case, and it takes really the amount and the opportunity. And you see that in the code. The amount is the thing that was being calculated. And we also have a flow, and flow can listen to events as well. And so this gives you an opportunity to do a lot of heavy lifting and processing in Heroku. But once you feel like you can move back into flow or Apex even, you can absolutely start continuing the process in this tool and these environments. So this is a very simple flow, and it's really just sending a notification to the bell icon, which you'll see in a moment, to the user's desktop or mobile app if they're running Salesforce Mobile. Okay, so now we've taken a look at the webhook code. We've had a look at change data capture, which will generate the event to start calculating the price. We've also seen the platform event we'll use to communicate back the calculated price, and the flow that will receive that platform event. Let's actually give it a go. So here we have an opportunity, and it's in discovery stage, and let's pretend we're now ready to move to proposal and quote, and we need that price calculated. So we're going to hit save, and that's of course going to generate the change data capture event, run our webhook, and when it's calculated, sure enough, we now see our notification according to the flow that we just took a look at. Fantastic. So those are all three demos that we wanted to cover in this presentation. Let's walk through what we just saw. The first demo gave us a way of subscribing to the event stream directly. So any subscriptions that you've set up and events that you've attached to those subscriptions will come through when you're listening. In this case, we were polling on that subscribe URL that Heroku Eventing gave us. And we were receiving cloud events when we did that. The second demo that we saw was another way of receiving events, but this time we'd created a webhook in Heroku. So a very distinct piece of logic. And in this case, we did attach Salesforce events, and they were streamed through from the subscriptions to the publication, in which case was our webhook. And that's the way in which we were able to handle those particular cloud events as well that were coming through to our logic. And then we got things a little bit more advanced, whereby we were implementing the async worker to process heavy compute, and in this case, we were calculating prices in Heroku. And so we were doing that by receiving a change data capture event from the opportunity, and that was streamed through to a webhook that we'd implemented, and that was doing all the calculations. And that subsequently, once it completed, sent a platform event via another publication to Salesforce org. And we saw that the flow was being invoked, and that made the notification appear in the top right hand corner of the screen. And of course, flow can do anything else. It doesn't need to do notifications. It could do other operations in the org, store the price calculation, for example, against the opportunity. So what are some of the other possibilities? There really is quite a number of ways in which you can use this technology, and we're very excited to learn about all of your use cases and experiences throughout this pilot. But here's another idea. Multi-org is very common for customers to have multiple orgs. And as you saw in the demonstration, you can have multiple subscriptions mapped to a single publication. What we also didn't show in this presentation is that you can create webhooks directly to data clouds. A data cloud allows you to ingest information through its API connector, its ingest API connector. And you can use Heroku Eventing if you've implemented perhaps a website or mobile application that's being exposed to consumers. Maybe you want to fuel some of those clicks and that data through to data cloud, so you can better manage changes and be more aware of updates that you want to make to your mobile and web applications based on how users interact with it. So you can absolutely do that with Heroku Eventing and send that information, that data, those insights through to data cloud. Fantastic. And finally, keep in mind that while in this demonstration we've been creating lots of webhooks with code ourselves, but there are many use cases where you can use third-party webhooks. So Google Apps, for example, has a number of webhooks that you can create to do automation over in Google Apps. If This Then That is a very popular orchestration framework that also provides a lot of webhooks. Of course, GitHub as well has a number of webhooks. That's really just a sample of some of the ones I could think of that you might want to consider using. So with that, I'll thank you very much for your time. We're very excited about not only the Heroku Eventing pilot in this video, but do check out the Heroku integration pilot as well, because both of these technologies really takes it to the next level when it comes to integrating Heroku into your Salesforce experiences. So thank you once again, and have a good day.